I'm Grace, 28 years old. Earlier tonight, my sister told me I should eat in the kitchen because, according to her, adopted children don't belong at the same table as the real family. Everyone burst out laughing, as if she had delivered the best punchline ever. I sat there, staring at the faces of the people I'd loved all my life, watching them wipe tears of amusement while I felt something inside me break. Still, I forced a calm smile, pulled an envelope from my bag, and placed it right in the middle of Mom's fine china. "You might want to call your attorneys," I said evenly. "Tomorrow we'll all be meeting about Mom and Dad's estate. Before I tell you what came next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever been treated like an outsider in your own home. Trust me, you'll want to hear the rest." But this moment wasn't where it began. The story really started half a year earlier, when everything in my life started collapsing. Both my parents caught COVID-19 within days of each other. My 3 older siblings, Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer, stayed away, saying they needed to protect their own health. I was the one who packed up and moved in to care for Mom and Dad, leaving my children with my husband, David, and spending endless weeks in the hospital. My siblings said they had their reasons. Michael said his job at the bank was far too critical to jeopardize. Sarah claimed her twins couldn't be without her. Jennifer simply admitted she couldn't bear to see our parents in that state. But I was the one who showed up every single day, holding their hands, speaking with doctors, making the calls no one else wanted to make about ventilators and medications. The nurses greeted me by name. The doctors turned to me whenever a hard decision came up. When Mom needed someone to authorize an experimental treatment, it was my pen on the paperwork. When Dad took a turn for the worse and needed someone by his side overnight, I was the one sleeping in that stiff hospital chair, my body aching from exhaustion. While my siblings sent bouquets and texted to ask how things were going, I was there, living through the nightmare in real time, watching the 2 people I loved most fade away despite every effort to save them. Mom passed away on a Tuesday morning, her hand in mine, while I whispered that I'd look after Dad and never let him be alone. 3 days later, he was gone too. I could swear his final words were, "Take care of Grace." Back then, I thought he meant they wanted my family to support me through my grief. I couldn't have known what he truly meant, or what he and Mom had quietly arranged in those final months. Their funeral looked like something out of a movie. Suddenly, my 3 siblings were right up front, putting on a performance of sorrow, weeping dramatically, and soaking in sympathy as if they'd been the ones who never left their side. People kept telling them how brave they were, thanking them for their strength and devotion during such a painful time. The absurdity of it didn't escape me. There they stood, basking in praise for their grief, while I, exhausted from 6 months of actual care and sleepless nights, felt invisible in my own family's tragedy. Being adopted into a household that already has biological children teaches you something early on. No matter how much love your parents give, your siblings always find ways to remind you that you're different. At first, it's harmless teasing. Tiny verbal jabs like, "Well, you're not really our sister," or "Mom and Dad picked you from strangers instead of having you themselves." It starts on playgrounds, but the sting deepens over the years. As adults, they became experts at quiet exclusion, the kind that's impossible to confront without sounding overly sensitive. There were family pictures taken at gatherings I wasn't told about, holidays I learned of only after seeing photos online, and jokes that suddenly stopped the moment I entered the room. I'd stand there, smiling awkwardly, aware that those memories belonged to a circle I could never quite enter. When my kids had birthdays, my siblings were always too busy, though they never missed each other's celebrations. Each slight was small on its own, but together they carved out a painful truth, that I was always the almost family member, tolerated but never fully embraced. Yet Mom and Dad were the exception. They made sure I never doubted for a second that I was theirs. Dad spent endless evenings at the kitchen table walking me through math problems, patient even when I stumbled. Mom was my rock, When I was 16 and heartbroken, she held me close and swore she'd have a talk with the boy who hurt me. They never missed a milestone, their pride unmistakable and unconditional. They were my refuge in a household that often felt like rough water, the proof that being chosen could be the greatest kind of love. Whenever anyone made a careless remark about my adoption, Mom would fix them with that fierce glare of hers and declare, "Grace is our daughter in every way that matters. Family isn't about blood, it's about love." After the funeral, we gathered in their house for the customary meal that follows a burial. Sitting in that dining room without them felt wrong. Their empty chairs at the head of the table like silent reminders that the anchors of our family were gone for good. Almost immediately, my siblings shifted into what they called practical discussions, talking about selling the house, dividing possessions, shutting down accounts, and tackling all the administrative chores death tends to leave behind. It unsettled me how quickly they jumped from sorrow to spreadsheets, from grief to the gleam of profit. "We should get the house appraised soon," Michael said casually, slicing into his ham as if we were planning a family barbecue instead of dismantling our childhood home. "The market's strong right now. We shouldn't miss the chance," he added, and Sarah nodded eagerly, already picturing how she'd spend her portion of money that wasn't even hers yet. "We also need to go through Mom's jewelry," she said. "Some of those pieces are worth a lot. That diamond necklace alone could fetch thousands." Jennifer, ever efficient, was already typing notes into her phone, the same focused look she wore when organizing school fundraisers years ago. "I can handle the accounts," she offered briskly. "I know how to deal with banks, given my experience." I sat there listening, nauseated, while they divided up our parents' lives like a holiday feast. These were the same people who couldn't bring themselves to visit when Mom and Dad were fighting for breath, yet now they were eager to stake their claims. The home I'd scrubbed and tended while they were sick, they wanted sold. The jewelry I'd helped Mom sort through when her hands trembled, they wanted priced and sold. The finances I'd managed when Dad's memory faltered, they wanted control of. Every word they said turned love and memory into numbers on a balance sheet. It struck me then how differently we saw legacy. To them, our parents' things were assets. To me, they were sacred remnants of two lives built on love. That's when Jennifer spoke up, wearing that practiced sweet smile I knew too well. The one that always came before something cutting. "Let's do this properly," she announced, sweeping her hand like a hostess at a gala, a family dinner to honor Mom and Dad. "We'll have it at my house next week, a real celebration of their lives." Michael and Sarah agreed right away, their voices bright with enthusiasm. They started chatting about bringing their spouses and kids, imagining a big photogenic family gathering that would look perfect in pictures. Then Jennifer turned to me with that polished smile I'd come to recognize, a smile that always meant something sharp was hiding beneath the sweetness. "Grace, you'll join us, won't you?" she said smoothly. "Maybe you could handle the cooking?" Mom always said you were the best in the kitchen, and it would be such a beautiful tribute to her. The message was gentle on the surface, but perfectly clear to anyone fluent in our family's unspoken hierarchies. Be there, but know your place. Do the work, but don't expect to be celebrated for it. Sarah quickly chimed in, her tone bright and agreeable, but her words cutting all the same. "Oh, that's perfect," she said. "And Grace, could you bring those dinner rolls Mom adored? The ones from that bakery near your place?" She always went on about how amazing they were. It would really make the evening special. Looking back, all the warning signs were obvious. The quiet huddles when they thought I wasn't paying attention, the whispered phone calls that ended when I entered the room, their sudden eagerness for a family event that somehow required my effort, but not my voice. But at the time, I was still grieving, still raw from months of watching our parents fade, still longing for connection in a family that had always kept me just outside the circle. So I said yes, like I always did. I spent 3 long days preparing for that dinner, cooking Mom's favorite meals from scratch, splurging on expensive wine I couldn't afford, even getting my hair done so I'd look presentable for what I hoped would be a heartfelt evening of remembrance. When I arrived at Jennifer's spotless suburban house, my arms were heavy with food and my heart was light with hope. Maybe finally, shared loss would draw us closer. Maybe the ache of losing Mom and Dad would remind us of what really mattered: each other. And for a little while, it almost felt that way. We traded stories about our parents, laughed at their little habits, talked about keeping traditions alive. For the first time in years, the air between us felt warm instead of tense. I even began to wonder if I'd misjudged them, if maybe the bitterness I'd carried was unfair. But I should have known better. I should have trusted what experience had already taught me. The mask started to slip during dessert, just when I'd finally begun to believe the evening might actually be sincere. I'd brought along Mom's famous apple pie, the same one she'd patiently taught me to make when I was 12, standing on a little stool so I could reach the counter while she guided my clumsy hands to pinch the crust just right. As I cut neat slices and placed them onto Jennifer's fine china, she suddenly rose from her chair and cleared her throat, signaling that she had something important to say. The laughter and chatter faded, and that old familiar heaviness settled in my stomach, the warning sign that my siblings were about to put me back in my place. "Before we wrap up tonight, there's something we need to discuss," Jennifer began, her tone laced with that sugary sweetness she always used when she was about to land a blow. "You know that eerie sense when you can feel something awful coming, but there's no way to stop it." That's exactly how it felt as I watched her smile, the polished, empty one she'd perfected over the years. Michael and Sarah were studying me, their faces unreadable, and it hit me then. This dinner had never been about honoring Mom and Dad. It was a setup. All the laughter, the stories, the fake warmth, it had all been preparation for what came next. "The thing is, Grace," Jennifer said smoothly, laying her fork down with exaggerated care, "we've been talking, and we think it's time to confront the elephant in the room regarding Mom and Dad's estate." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face composed. Years of experience had taught me how to hide the storm inside. "What elephant?" I asked, though deep down I already knew exactly where this was going, and why they'd waited until I'd cooked, served, and smiled before springing it on me. Michael leaned in, adopting his polished banker tone, the one he used when he wanted to sound calm and rational while delivering something cruel. "Look, we all know Mom and Dad loved you, Grace. No one's denying that. But the truth is, inheritance laws usually favor biological children unless specific arrangements say otherwise. That's just how it goes in most families." Sarah gave me a sympathetic nod, her expression soft and rehearsed, as though she were breaking bad news about a natural disaster she couldn't prevent. "We're not trying to exclude you, Grace. We'd never do that. But the estate, the house, the accounts, the insurance money, we're talking about a lot here. It only makes sense that it stays within the bloodline. Legally and practically, that's the right thing to do." For a moment, I just sat there, absorbing it. The people who couldn't be bothered to visit while our parents were dying, who'd stayed away when I was sleeping in hospital chairs and signing treatment forms, were now calmly suggesting I didn't deserve an equal share because I wasn't born into the family. Their nerve was astonishing, though not unexpected. "Mom and Dad never made that distinction," I said quietly, forcing steadiness into my voice while fury burned under the surface. "They never treated me as anything less than their daughter. Mom and Dad had always treated us with complete equality, no difference in affection, in expectations, or in what it meant to belong." Jennifer gave a dismissive wave, the kind adults use when humoring a child's fantasy. "Oh, Grace, you know parents just say those things to keep everyone happy. When real money's involved, people think differently," she said lightly. "That's just human nature. And besides, you've got David. You have his job, his income. We were the ones Mom and Dad really needed to worry about financially." The logic was so backward, it took a moment for my mind to catch up. Because I had a husband, I supposedly needed nothing. Because they'd abandoned our parents during their worst days, they now somehow deserved a bigger reward. Because I'd built a life outside their toxicity, I was expected to be thankful for whatever crumbs they left behind. Then Sarah added her own brand of condescension, that practiced tone of concern she'd perfected since childhood. "You've been managing their affairs lately, right? We just want to make sure everything's handled properly. No offense, but you're not exactly an expert in estate law or complex finances. We only want to protect everyone's interests." The air in the room thickened. They weren't just questioning whether I should inherit. They were questioning my honesty, my competence, who I was. I looked at the three faces around the table, searching for any flicker of the siblings I used to believe in. Michael wouldn't look at me, pretending to be absorbed in his pie. Sarah twisted her wedding ring over and over, avoiding my gaze. Jennifer sat poised and self-satisfied, wearing that brittle, triumphant smile of someone who thought she'd pulled off something clever. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a spontaneous discussion. They'd choreographed every word. The dinner had never been about honoring our parents. It was a coordinated ambush. They'd chosen their timing, their lines, even their seating to make sure the message landed cleanly. I didn't belong, and I should make it easy for them by stepping aside. If they could make me feel guilty enough, small enough, less than enough, I might just hand over my inheritance quietly, sparing them the inconvenience of legal formality. I rose slowly, the chair legs screeching against Jennifer's glossy hardwood floor, slicing through the tense silence like a blade. "Well," I began, my voice calm in a way that startled even me, considering the chaos twisting inside my chest. "This has been enlightening." I moved toward the kitchen, gathering the dishes I'd brought, the food I'd cooked with such hope, believing tonight would be about love and healing. Behind me came a rush of hushed voices, the sound of hurried damage control. They were probably debating whether to call me back or let me go, whether to press their point or pretend it hadn't gone too far. "Grace, don't make this into a scene," Michael said finally, his tone carefully measured, as if he were the reasonable one in the room. "We're family. We can settle this like adults. There's no reason to get upset or turn it into something bigger than it is." "Reasonably," I repeated under my breath, the word burning, as though it were reasonable to ambush someone under the guise of family unity, as though it were reasonable to question my place in this family, or my worth, because of how I came into it. I turned back toward them, still holding the pie plates that had carried Mom's recipe, her love, her lessons. Meeting each of their eyes in turn, I said evenly, "You want to know what I think is reasonable?" "I think it's perfectly reasonable," I said evenly, "that the daughter who spent half a year caring for dying parents, the one who gave up her own health, her family, and her peace of mind, should be treated with the same respect as the siblings who were too busy living their comfortable lives to help." Jennifer's expression faltered, the polished composure cracking just enough to show the panic underneath. "That's not fair, Grace," she protested, her tone sharpening. "We had jobs, families, responsibilities. We couldn't just abandon everything like you did. Not everyone has that kind of luxury. So did I shot back before she could continue. I had a career, a husband, children who needed their mother. But I still chose to put Mom and Dad first, because that's what family is supposed to do. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. I picked up my purse and reached for the envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, the one that suddenly felt heavier than ever. The next morning, at 10 sharp, the will was scheduled to be read at Henderson and Associates, the firm that had managed my parents' legal affairs for more than 2 decades. I arrived early, 15 minutes ahead of time, dressed in my best black suit and holding the leather portfolio David had once gifted me for my birthday. Inside were my parents' final letter and copies of every document I'd handled during their last months: medical invoices, insurance paperwork, bank statements, and powers of attorney. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Not with them. When I walked into the conference room, my siblings were already there, grouped together like generals plotting their next move. Michael had brought his wife, Linda, sharp eyes, sharper instincts, the kind of corporate lawyer who could sniff out weakness in a heartbeat. Sarah sat beside her husband Tom, the accountant, no doubt ready to dissect every figure and clause. Jennifer was alone, but her smudged mascara and strained smile told me she'd been crying and trying to hide it. George Henderson, the family's longtime attorney, looked up as I entered. A kindly man in his 70s, he had known our parents since before my adoption. His handshake was firm, his condolences sincere in a way that pierced through the tension hanging in the air. "Grace," he said warmly, "your parents spoke of you so often these last few months. They were incredibly proud of how you cared for them, how you gave so much of yourself to make sure they were never alone." I caught the way my siblings glanced at one another, silent alarm passing between them. They were wondering if he knew, if he'd seen the letter I'd mentioned, if he was part of whatever secret Mom and Dad had set in motion. Maybe they were realizing, for the first time, that their battle might already be over before it even began. George settled into his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, the folder before him thick with the papers that would decide everything. "Before we move to the formal reading," George began, his calm, measured voice cutting through the silence, "there's something I'd like to clarify first. It may save us all some confusion later." He looked directly at Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer, his expression steady, the kind that only years of guiding families through difficult truths could forge. "Yesterday, Grace brought me a letter your parents entrusted to her after the funeral. I'm assuming she's already shared its contents with you?" Michael straightened, clearing his throat in that self-assured way he always did when he wanted control of the room. "We've heard her version," he said briskly. "But George, there must be some kind of mistake. Our parents would never have meant to completely exclude their other children. Maybe they were confused or pressured. They weren't in the best health at the time." George's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened, a subtle shift that carried the weight of finality. "There's no confusion here, Michael. Your parents met with me 8 months ago, right in the middle of their illness, and made deliberate, detailed changes to their will. They were entirely lucid and very clear about what they wanted. We had several meetings. They took time to think carefully before signing anything." Sarah leaned forward, her voice trembling now, layered with disbelief and fear. "But that doesn't sound like them, George. They always treated us equally. They never played favorites. It's not who they were." George studied her for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Did they?" The question hung there like a blade, and no one answered. "Because from what I saw in all those meetings," he continued evenly, "Grace was the only one who showed up. She was the one present for every conversation about their care, their wishes, and their legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. She was the one who asked about every treatment, who clarified every instruction, who ensured their wishes were followed and their comfort protected. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the muted noise of traffic outside, underscoring the tension as George unfolded the will and began to read. His voice was calm, practiced, the tone of a man who had spent a lifetime guiding families through moments that tore them apart. The legal phrasing was dense, wrapped in formalities and citations, but the message beneath it was impossible to misinterpret. Every asset, the $300,000 family home, the $180,000 investment portfolios, the $200,000 in life insurance benefits, was left to me. Not a penny, not a mention, was reserved for Michael, Sarah, or Jennifer, except for one explicit clause noting that they were to be excluded from inheritance. But that wasn't the full extent of the shock. As George turned another page, his steady voice revealed layers of generosity I hadn't known existed. There was a savings account that had been quietly growing for 15 years, meant solely for my children's college education. There were stock holdings purchased in my name, investments I'd never known about, built quietly while I'd been scraping to pay bills. There was even a small vacation fund, money they had been setting aside for trips we'd never get to take. By the time George finished, the total amount came to nearly $600,000, more than I'd ever dreamed of possessing. I sat frozen, the realization crashing over me in waves. My parents had planned all of this, silently and deliberately, to make sure I'd be cared for, to repay love with love, loyalty with security. They hadn't just passed down what they owned. They'd quietly been accumulating wealth for me and my family for years, all while I'd been worrying about bills and stretching paychecks. The revelation was still sinking in when Michael shot to his feet, his chair crashing into the wall behind him. "This is unbelievable!" he shouted, face flushed with rage. "No parent leaves everything to one child unless something shady is going on. Grace must have manipulated them when they were weak and sick." George didn't flinch. His tone stayed level, but there was steel beneath it. "I'd advise caution, Michael. Your parents came to me on their own, without Grace present, to make these revisions. They were completely lucid, deliberate, and consistent about what they wanted." Linda, ever the corporate predator, leaned forward, eyes sharp and calculating. "We'll need to review all the supporting records," she said briskly. "Medical documentation confirming their mental capacity, witness affidavits, any video evidence you might have. A change this drastic suggests possible coercion." That word finally broke through my stunned silence. "Coercion?" I repeated, locking eyes with her, my voice low and steady. "You mean like the kind that comes from spending 6 months in hospital corridors, sleeping in chairs, managing medications, coordinating with doctors, and keeping their home running, while your husband here didn't manage a single visit?" Jennifer began to cry again, but the tears looked rehearsed, every sob carefully measured for effect. "Grace, how can you be so heartless?" she gasped. "We're your family. We grew up together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" It was quite the show. She'd always been a master of weaponized fragility, and I had to hand it to her. The performance was convincing enough for an audience that didn't know better. Sarah tried a softer angle, leaning toward me with a pleading expression that reminded me of someone grabbing at a life raft. "Grace, please," she said. "Tom and I are barely staying afloat. The kids need braces. The mortgage is late. You know we'd help you if the situation were reversed." Would they? The thought echoed bitterly in my mind, because I could remember the weeks I'd begged them for support during Mom and Dad's illness, and every single one of them had an excuse ready. I remembered that night when Dad fell, and I couldn't lift him by myself. I'd called Sarah in tears, begging for help, but she'd told me she couldn't come. Her book club was meeting, and she'd promised to bring dessert. Another time, I'd asked Michael to help me sort through some of the financial paperwork Dad was too weak to handle, but he'd brushed me off, saying his position at the bank made it inappropriate to get involved in family finances. George cleared his throat, his quiet authority slicing through the rising chaos. "There are still a few matters left to cover," he said, drawing out more papers from his leather folder. "Your parents left additional instructions specifically concerning any potential disputes over the will." He reached across the table and handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it. Dad's neat, deliberate handwriting instantly recognizable. "Grace," he said gently, "your father asked that you open this only if your siblings chose to contest their wishes." My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Inside was another letter in Dad's familiar script, along with copies of documents and a few photographs. I began reading silently, and with each line, my pulse quickened. My parents had anticipated this exact confrontation. Every accusation, every attempt to undermine their decision, and they had prepared meticulously for it. "What does it say?" Michael demanded, his voice tight, the brittle edge of panic creeping in. I looked up slowly, meeting each of their eyes in turn, these people who had just spent an hour tearing into my character, treating me like an intruder instead of their sister. "It says," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding in my ears, "that if anyone contests this will in court, they lose all rights to personal items and heirlooms, everything. Mom's wedding ring, Dad's service medals, the family photos, the ornaments, all of it gets donated to charity instead." The words landed like a hammer. For the first time, None of them spoke. The realization that they could lose the sentimental symbols of their childhood, the pieces that couldn't be replaced or sold, hit harder than losing the money ever could. You could see the moment it hit them, that dawning awareness that their hunger for money might have just cost them the last tangible pieces of their family history. Jennifer's composure cracked completely. She was crying now, not the controlled theatrical sobs she'd used before, but raw, unguarded tears. "They really did hate us," she choked out, her voice trembling with something closer to heartbreak than anger. "Our own parents hated us enough to cut us out of everything." For a split second, her pain pierced through my fury. These people had hurt me deeply, but they were still the children I'd once shared bedrooms, Christmas mornings, and secrets with. The family I'd tried for so long to love, in spite of everything. "They didn't hate you," I said quietly, meaning every word. "They were disappointed." "That's not the same thing." Michael spun toward me, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. "Disappointed?" he spat. "We all built decent lives, good jobs, solid marriages, kids who are thriving. What more could they have possibly wanted from us?" "Your presence," I answered, my voice steady, though my chest felt tight. "Your time." "They wanted you to care when it mattered, to show up without being asked, to call them just to talk, not only when you needed something. They wanted visits that didn't feel like obligations squeezed between conference calls and dinner parties. They wanted to feel loved, not managed." The words hung there, heavy and undeniable, filling the room like smoke no one dared to breathe. Deep down, beneath all their denial and outrage, they knew I was right. They'd taken Mom and Dad's love for granted for years, always assuming there'd be another chance, more time to visit, more time to call, more time to show they cared. But time had run out, and now the truth sat between us like a verdict no one could appeal. George began collecting his folders, the quiet rustle of paper breaking the tense silence. "Grace," he said gently, "I'll need you to come in next week to finalize the transfer paperwork and go over the logistics. The house title can be moved over immediately, though some of the investment accounts will take a few weeks to process." His tone made it clear that, legally, there was nothing left to argue. As everyone rose to leave, Sarah made one last, trembling attempt to reclaim something from the wreckage. "Grace, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Couldn't we at least share the house? It's where we all grew up. There are so many memories there. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I thought about that house, the walls that had echoed with laughter I was rarely part of, the rooms where I'd always felt like a guest instead of a daughter. It was filled with memories, yes, but for me most of them carried more ache than comfort. I slipped into my coat and met her gaze steadily. "You're right," I said quietly. "It does hold a lot of history, just not the kind I want to keep living with." I walked to the door, paused, and looked back one final time at the three faces that had once defined my family. "I'll be putting it on the market soon," I said. "Those memories belong to the past, not my future." Then I left. The drive home felt dreamlike, the world both sharp and distant at once. In less than 48 hours, I had gone from being the family outsider to standing on solid financial ground for the first time in my life. I kept thinking about how quietly and deliberately my parents had protected me, building this safety net behind the scenes while David and I had worried about bills and college savings. When I stepped through the door, the smell of coffee greeted me. David was waiting in the kitchen, concern written all over his face. "How bad was it?" he asked softly, pulling me into his arms as if he could hold me together by sheer strength. I pressed my face against his chest, the tears finally breaking free, not out of anger or sorrow, but gratitude so deep it hurt. "They left me everything," I whispered. "The house, the accounts, all of it. We're finally okay." He drew back, searching my expression, making sure he'd heard right. When I nodded, his whole face lit up. He grabbed me by the waist and lifted me off the ground, spinning me around like he used to when life still felt simple. We both laughed and cried at once, a mix of disbelief and joy. Our kids, Emma and Jake, came running at the sound, their little faces bright with confusion and excitement, the first of many moments I knew that would finally feel free of fear. At 12 and 10, Emma and Jake were old enough to understand that their grandparents were gone, but still too young to comprehend the tangled mess of inheritance and betrayal that had followed. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her small brow furrowed with worry as she watched me cry and laugh all at once. I crouched down so we were eye to eye, taking both their hands in mine. "Grandma and Grandpa left us some money," I said gently. "It means Daddy and I won't have to work so much, and we'll have more time to do things together as a family." Jake's eyes went wide, his face lighting up with the kind of unfiltered excitement only children can feel. "Does that mean we can finally get a dog?" he blurted out. David and I looked at each other and just started laughing, real, relieved laughter that felt like sunlight after months of storm. Leave it to our kids to cut through all the adult chaos and remind us what truly mattered: family, safety, and the simple joys we'd been too tired to imagine for so long. In the following weeks, I threw myself into the long, complicated process of settling my parents' estate. The house needed repairs, cleaning, endless paperwork, and sorting through decades of belongings that held both memories and ghosts. It was exhausting, but necessary. One last act of stewardship for the people who had given me everything. My siblings, however, refused to fade quietly from the picture. Michael called again and again, his tone shifting between threats of lawsuits and sentimental appeals about keeping the family together. Sarah appeared at my door twice without warning, mascara running, begging me to reconsider because of her difficult financial situation. Jennifer took a different route, sending sympathy cards and flowers, as if tokens of affection could erase the years of cruelty and the wounds left by her betrayal. But no matter what they tried, I didn't waver. I owed my parents the respect of fulfilling their last wishes exactly as they had written them, without compromise, without guilt. Then, when I least expected it, something entirely new began. I was at the grocery store one morning, pushing my cart down the produce aisle, when I heard someone behind me call my name. "Grace? Grace Williams?" I turned toward the familiar voice and saw Patricia Chen, the hospital social worker who had helped coordinate my parents' care during those impossible final weeks. "Patricia," I said, genuinely smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. "It's so good to see you." We spent a few minutes catching up, talking about how I'd been holding up, how the kids were doing, how my family was adjusting after the loss. Then her expression softened into something more serious. "Grace, I hope this isn't too forward," she began, "but I remember you mentioning that you were adopted." I nodded, a little curious. "I did, yes." "Why?" Patricia glanced around the crowded grocery aisle, then leaned in closer, her voice lowering into that careful, confidential tone reserved for delicate subjects. "There's a case at work that made me think of you," she said quietly. "Two little girls, sisters, ages 3 and 4. Their parents both passed away from COVID complications about 6 weeks ago, and we're struggling to find a placement that can take them together." My chest tightened instantly. The pain was sharp and familiar. Another family torn apart by the same illness that had already stolen so much from me. "That's awful," I said softly. "Don't they have anyone else? Grandparents? Aunts? Someone who can take them in?" Patricia shook her head, her eyes heavy with sadness. "No one close," she said, "and the few distant relatives we've reached out to aren't able, or willing, to take both girls." "They're in temporary foster care right now," Patricia continued softly, "but the system is stretched thin. These girls need a permanent home, and they need it soon. Their names are Lily and Rose. They're both wonderful kids, but they've been through more than any child should." Something inside me shifted at those words, a quiet, aching pull that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. I remembered what it was like to be small and frightened, to wait for someone to see me, to believe I was worth loving despite the pain and chaos that had shaped my beginning. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though even as I said it, I already knew the answer forming in the back of my mind. Patricia gave a gentle, knowing smile, the kind that came from years of helping people find the families they were meant to have. "Because I watched you with your parents," she said. "The patience, the love, the way you showed up even when it broke your heart to do it. You have so much to give, Grace, and I thought maybe you'd want to meet them. At least think about it." I drove home afterward in a daze, her words looping in my mind like a melody I couldn't shake. Two little girls, sisters who had lost everything, just like I once had, children waiting for someone to choose them, to bring them in from the cold, to prove that love could outlast grief. When I told David what Patricia had said, he was silent for a long time. I could see the gears turning as he studied me, already knowing where my heart was leading. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally, his voice careful, gentle. "I'm thinking about what it felt like to be 4, I said quietly, "and wondering if anyone would ever want me." Over the next few months, our lives became a whirlwind of forms, inspections, and interviews. There were home studies, financial reviews, psychological evaluations, and endless background checks. Emma and Jake even met separately with the caseworker to talk about how they felt about welcoming 2 new sisters. Emma started sketching plans for shared bedrooms and hairstyles to teach. Jake proudly announced he'd let them borrow his favorite toys. Every step made it clearer. This wasn't just a possibility. It was something our family was meant to do. It took 8 long months, endless forms, background checks, interviews, and court hearings. But eventually, the call came. Lily and Rose were officially ours. The day we brought them home felt like the closing of one life and the beginning of another. That first night, I tucked them into their new beds, read the same bedtime story 3 times, and watched their eyes grow heavy with trust. Then Rose looked up at me, her voice small and uncertain. "Are you really our mama now?" "Forever?" I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Forever and always, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're home." A year later, our Sundays looked very different. We'd moved into a house big enough for everyone, with a yard where laughter carried on the breeze. Emma sat in the grass teaching Lily and Rose how to braid friendship bracelets, while Jake helped David at the grill, proud of his role as the burger assistant. Watching them together, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. The feeling of being whole. My phone buzzed just as we were cutting into dessert. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated but answered. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Grace, I saw the adoption announcement in the paper. You looked happy." She apologized for the will, for the dinner, for everything. When she finished, I said quietly, "I forgave you all months ago. But forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to how they were. Too much has happened." After I hung up, David slipped his arms around me from behind. I leaned into him, watching our children play under the fading sunlight. "Everything's perfect," I said, and for once, it truly was. If this story touched your heart, remember to like and subscribe for more tales about choosing love over blood and hope over resentment. Because sometimes the family we build for ourselves is stronger than the one we're born into.